Yes, indeed, folks. So listen to Blue Please here on Wire Radio with myself, Total Biscuit. Now, for a little bit of positivity before we go into the next segment, I'd like to announce that I shall be having a fellow on the show on Friday. Yes, there will be a Friday show. So you only have to wait 3 days between now and then for more Blue Please goodness, or badness, whichever you prefer. I'm good at both. His name is Pixel Smith. And he's been going on a tour of Europe with his friend. He's actually a journalist. And he's been visiting various guildmates. And he's been documenting his experiences. Now, I've always been a proponent of massively multiplayer gaming as a way to reach out to people in other countries and develop yourself socially. And I think this is probably one of the best examples of that. I've too have gone to other countries and other places to meet people that I knew from the internet. And it has mostly been a universally positive experience. Mostly universal. Go figure. Work that one out if you can. Strain your brains. I'll be having him on the show on Friday to talk about his experiences. And I'm very much looking forward to that. So tune in Friday. I'll be interviewing Pixel Smith about his tour around Europe to meet his guildies. Shall be awesome. Now, Arcanist Belt. We have defeated Ragnaros. And you know what that means? It's time for another retrospective. This is something we've been doing over the past few weeks. Whenever we clear an instance, I do a little bit of a retrospective on it. And I decide to have a look at the instance and what we learned from it. And indeed, what Blizzard learned from it. Now, Molten Core is one of the most notorious raids in the entirety of World of Warcraft. And, like most notoriety, does not exist for very good reasons. Molten Core was not the first available raid, but it was the first available full-sized raid dungeon. First raid, of course, was UBRS, 15-man, and Onyxia, but which was, of course, Onyxia being a single boss encounter. UBRS being a small form raid. The first full-sized 40-man raid was Molten Core. And Molten Core has a very, very horrible reputation. Now, why does it have a horrible reputation? Okay, well, let me count the ways. Molten Core is a giant cave. That's boring. Molten Core has mobs that mostly look the same as every other mob. That's boring. Molten Core has, like, one or two unique models. That's boring. Most of the bosses look identical. That's boring. Molten Core has so much trash, it beggars belief. That's boring. Molten Core has trash that respawns every 18 minutes. Actually, it's 14, isn't it? Ancient Core Hounds. These things used to be a real problem. That's horrible. Molten Core has loot, which is incredibly badly itemized in almost every respect. That's bad. That's a big list. Now, it's interesting to see people look back fondly at Molten Core. And to some degree, I also look back fondly at Molten Core, but not because Molten Core was any good. It wasn't. Molten Core was really bad. And having recently beaten it in Arcanist Belt, again, for the umpteenth time, I can see why it was bad. Let's have a look at the mechanics of the place, to start with. The mechanics of the bosses. It is interesting to see that people thought Molten Core was challenging. At the time, it was. Why? It's not because it was hard. There's your first clue. The real reason why it was challenging is because people and players who entered Molten Core had not seen anything like what was in there. No, nothing at all. Mass curses? No. Mass magical effects that could kill you? No. Staying out of the fire? No. Living bombs? No. Debuffs that had to be cleansed? No. All this stuff. Multiple ad control fights? Absolutely not. 5-mans, and indeed even UBRS, did not properly prepare you for this place. At all. And as a result, guilds ran face first into a brick wall. Getting 40 people to raid together was challenging enough. Then running them into a place that was completely jam-packed full of trash, that didn't help matters. Not in the slightest. Oh no. Not at all. I mean, let's have a look at the first boss. First boss is Luciferon. Luciferon has 2 ads that have mind controls. Oh noes, they must be tanked and killed. His abilities are Random Shadow Bolt, and a Curse, and a Magic Effect, and that's it. Yeah, I'm not kidding. That's the kind of thing that a trash mob in TBC would have done to you. This thing was effectively a trash mob. It was barely a boss. Magmadar wasn't much better. Magmadar had a gimmick. Magmadar had an enrage that could be only removed by the use of something called Tranquilizing Shot, which was a drop-off of Lucifer, which in a massive bungle of design, bearing in mind you only got one of these per Lucifer kill, meant the first time you went into Molten Core, you couldn't get past the second boss, because you didn't have enough Tranquilizing Shots. You only had one. Seriously. What a stupid idea. What a dumb idea. Now, that entire fight basically said, oh, fears, lol. Which gave a massive advantage to any guild that had a lot of dwarf priests at the time. Now, of course, it doesn't really make a difference, because you can keep people healed regardless, and there's more ways to break out of fear than there used to be. And it was like, don't stand in the fire. Ah! Hard. Really hard. Now, the worst thing is you then go on to Gehennas, which is basically a carbon copy with a few minor changes. And most of the Flame Waker, as they are called, mobs, that just look like Naga, did the same kind of thing. Gehennas was like Rain of Fire, i.e. stand out of the fire. It had a curse, take it away. It had random shadow bolts, take them away. It had ads that must be tanked and killed. And that was it. Gar got a bit interesting. Oh, wait, no it didn't. It was tank ads, kill Gar. The only interesting point was that the ads would explode and would occasionally kill people unless you were careful. Hard. Geddon. What did you have with Geddon? You had AoE, stand out of the fire. Bomb, run away from the raid. Mana Burn. Now, the Mana Burn was probably the toughest part of that. But again, it was something that could just be got rid of. It could be cleansed. It was more difficult for Horde guilds, of course, because they didn't have paladins in order to do that. They had to have priests to de-magic, and they were the only class that could do it at the time. So that was something of a pain. But it was an artificial level of difficulty as opposed to being an actually challenging fight. Shazra was probably one of the more interesting because it had one of those nasty random aggro resets, which is something that people hadn't really encountered before that. Onyxia had it to some degree, but Shazra was really bizarre in that respect. Blinked all over the place, did nasty AoEs and all of that stuff. And you moved on and you found Sulphur on Harbinger, which was effectively an enhanced version of what you've just done. Lots more dots. More magic effects to get rid of. More ads to kill in order. Golemag, same difference, except you don't kill the ads this time, you just tank them. You just blast the guy down, that's it. That is really all there is to it. Now, just FYI for those sending me messages on IRC, I'm not reading them. Seriously, why would I read them during a show? It's incredibly distracting. So don't do it. Send them at the end, or send an email. That's the best way to do it. themurloc@gmail.com. That is themurloc@gmail.com. Now, two other bosses towards the end. Majordomo. Majordomo is 8 ads. Majordomo was quite challenging just because the sheer number of ads you had to deal with and the fact that the ads couldn't be controlled in the usual ways. They couldn't be crowd controlled if you killed 4 or more of them. So that made things difficult. It was more challenging. Now, the interesting thing about Majordomo is that you couldn't get Majordomo unless you doused the runes. Now, dousing the runes is something that now recently has been taken out, and rightfully so. It was a stupid mechanic from the get-go. It involved you leveling up reputation with a particular faction which was halfway across the bloody world. Not kidding, it was in Ashara. You had to go to this remote island. Bear in mind, Ashara's pretty big to begin with. Most people didn't even have epic mounts back then. All the way over to Ashara to pick up this stuff. And multiple people had to go get it. Multiple people. It was the stupidest thing I've ever seen. They had to douse these runes in order to summon Majordomo, then beat Majordomo, of course, in order to get to Ragnaros. Ragnaros was a giant resist check. Huge resist check. And amusingly enough, when they first had him in there, the gear wasn't there. He didn't have enough gear to do it. And then, of course, Thorium Brotherhood came in, and you had to grind endless amounts of reputation and huge amounts of materials. Massive. I mean, I'm thankful right now that with Arcanist Belt we really didn't need to do that, because yes, the power grade of our characters has increased. Not really too much to say about that, to be honest, and we can survive most of it, and most of our guys are not wearing fire resistance gear. The tanks are. There's a little bit of fire res, just the kind of normal fire res you get from the fire resistance aura, etc., but that's about it, and that's okay. I survived that entire encounter wearing only an Onyxia scale cloak and the fire resistance that I got from auras. That was it. The tank was wearing full Dark Iron plate, but that was all of our stuff. That was like all of our Dark Iron, all of our cores. In fact, it was probably more than the amount of cores we got just to make one set of this stuff. Remember back when it was 40 man, you actually had to do that? It was a total nightmare. It was an artificial way of stopping people from beating the boss. It was a gear check in extremis, and not just on DPS. We're talking about having to have massive amounts of fire resistance gear, which was not readily available at the time, and required you to hit Molten Core over and over and over again in order to get it. It's horrible. Really nasty rooster block there. Now, the design of the entire instance is just massively flawed. It's not even linear, in the sense that you go down a preset path. You have to go in entirely the opposite direction to kill two of the bosses, and if you don't kill those bosses, you end up respawning core hounds every 14 minutes. It's like the instance was deliberately designed to annoy the hell out of you. Certainly annoys the hell out of me. And I don't think people really learned a lot, and I think that is very, very obvious for when people set foot in Blackwing Lair and got utterly screwed on the first boss. They learned nothing. I think about Razorgore versus everything in there. Think about what you could possibly learn in Molten Core. You can learn how to decurse. You should have already known that to begin with. You can learn about aggro. Okay, fair enough. Razorgore, aggro, doesn't matter. Doesn't make a blind bit of friggin' difference. Ad control. Yeah, think about ad control. Think about controlling 4 ads. Now think about controlling 100, because that's pretty much what Razorgore involves. Think about kiting. Kiting never happened in Molten Core at all. Not a single boss required any kind of kiting. The only thing I could even consider kiting would be pulling Geddon into Gar's room. Pulling Geddon into Gar's room. And even that's really not exactly kiting, is it? Shooting and running all the way through the others, or just using your pet to do it, it's pretty terrible. It's lame. It's not kiting. And yet you have to do all this stuff. The control of a NPC creature in order to do an arbitrary task, again, not part of it at all. Razorgore was a totally different world. Molten Core didn't teach you anything. You wonder why people ran slap bang into a brick wall again, wandering into Blackwing Lair. Because they learned nothing. Not a thing. They will learn way more from Zul'Gurub. Way more. Failstraz was absolute complete pain in the same respect. Tanking orders? No. That never happened. It's just amazing that they came out with it and it was just such a brokenly horrible instance. Now, I think that there is value to be taken from Molten Core in the respect that they learned how not to do a raid encounter. There are some elements which continue to exist. Don't stand in the fire, invented in Molten Core, continues to exist this very day. You Are the Bomb continues to exist, even in Naxxramas. Grobulus is pretty much You Are the Bomb. It's the same thing. Mind controls still happen on Kel'Thuzad. Continue to happen. Been happening in many instances. It happened in Kael'thas. All sorts of things. Mind controls. A relatively challenging mechanic. So it's not to say that it wasn't a building block, but it is a shaky foundation to base your raid game on. So is Blackwing Lair. I mean, Blackwing Lair is a great instance, don't get me wrong, but you can't build your raiding on that. How are people supposed to learn? If anything, the debacle of Molten Core actually caused them to swing completely the wrong direction with Wrath of the Lich King, because they're so scared that this kind of thing will happen again. They overtuned Karazhan, which scared the hell out of people, even though most of the stuff in Karazhan is basically just advanced heroics. And people should have been able to learn there, but no, they overtuned it, which scared people, so they undertuned Wrath, because good lord, the last thing we wanted was another Molten Core disaster. And it's unfortunate that they swung a little bit too far. I think what Blizzard can learn from that is training people to do encounters is fine. Training people to raid, giving them a raiding 101 is fine. But you've repeated the same mistake that Molten Core had. There was nothing else when Molten Core was out for a long time. It's the same with Naxx, there's nothing else. It's entirely the same problem, but on the other end of the spectrum. MC was too alien, you couldn't learn. And there was no other content. and Wrath's too easy. And your learning can't be applied to anything because there's no other content. People thought TBC was bad. Lord. My name is Total Biscuit, and you're listening to Blue Please here on WoW Radio. When we come back, it will be the Illusion of Choice, where you get to pick the last topic of the show. Email to themurloc@gmail.com. That is themurloc@gmail.com. Fear Factory coming up right now. Enjoy.